Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is the Ukraine War news update video for the 2nd of April 2023. Let's get to our usual starting point, which is the Ukraine figures released for the Russian losses for the day before. I find these indicatively useful. Critics say they are inaccurate and propaganda. I think there are elements of that, but broadly they're more accurate than critics think they are. And they're certainly more accurate than the figures the Russians produce. And I've talked about that in previous segments, so don't have a go at me for that, you pro-Russian voices in the threads. 560 liquidated personnel for the day before. This is kicking around these kind of numbers for the last 3 or 4 days. It has been. It looks... So what do these figures tell me? What story does this write? It's one of a culmination of the Russian winter offensive, and there's a lot of talk about that in the ISW today. I'm going to dip into that. It tells us that things have calmed down, possibly from weather as well. It's very cold. A lot of snow has fallen in the east. So these things together will mean that the figures are lower than they have been, but of course still higher than the average for the war as a whole. 2 tanks, 5 APCs, 4 artillery systems. That's all fairly low compared to what we have seen. 1 drone and 9 vehicles and fuel tanks. So fairly low day. There might be fewer drones up in the air due to weather. That might be the case. Lots of reasons why the figures could be lower. But if we look at the figures overall, the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine has reported that in March, the armed forces destroyed 24,100 Russian soldiers. This is a record monthly loss of Russian personnel since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. So again, it's not so important to look at the numbers per se. So, these numbers aren't accurate and etc., etc. But actually, if these are 30% inaccurate, 40%, whatever, you can still see a trend here. And the trend is that the last 5 months, things have got markedly worse. Well, it's been an upward trend from July last year. So when we started seeing the Ukrainian counteroffensives, the Russian losses went up, and then we started seeing the Russian offensive, and the losses went up even more. So it's not been a good sort of, 7 months for the Russians. But the last 3 months has been particularly bad. This month, March being the worst. Okay. What have Russia been doing in the last 24 hours or so? I can't verify the timing of this, but this is a TOS 1 hit, thermobaric style. Defmon says hadn't seen that for some time. But look at the shockwaves coming off there from these thermobaric hits. The really devastating form of artillery. Now, I'm going to be talking a little bit about artillery in a second. Just see all these pockmarks everywhere. Each of these is either an MLRS drop or a single artillery round hitting. And that is important for what I say. It's just littered. Everywhere is littered with the pockmarks and craters of Russian artillery use, particularly. They have used a massive amount of artillery over the course of the war. Now, Lancets are still causing... Holy cacaroni. Lancets are still causing... I do apologise about that. Huge problem for the Ukrainians, or at least something of a problem. I don't know how prevalent these are on a daily basis, and sometimes they release batches of footage to make it look like it's terrible, but actually they've been all recorded at the same time. That happened with the Bayraktar drones at the beginning of the war, where people were thinking for like a month Bayraktar were causing huge amounts of trouble to the Russians, but actually it had been all recorded fairly soon into the war and around the same time, and then they released it in dribs and drabs to give you the sense, the Ukrainians did, to give you the sense that the Bayraktars were a chronic problem for the Russians. Now, one of the biggest bits of news last night or yesterday from the Ukrainian side of things was that Russians were celebrating a few days ago that they fully took the Azov factory in North Bakhmut. A Ukrainian Tochka U made a surprise visit and leveled one of the main buildings. This is a big hit. Right. You see what happens when I maximize a video. I have it on mute, and the maximizing of the video turns the mute off, and it's really frustrating. And that's why you suddenly get bits of music when I prepped it for not having music. Anyway, you can see the Azov complex there. one large building take an absolutely huge hit, and that is yeah. Be interesting to see what the actual damage of that was. What's a Tochka U? Well, it's a big old missile. Uh, has a CEP circle error probable of 95 meters. The Tochka U has quite a sizable warhead. It can take nuclear warhead, actually. These are big missiles that we had thought Ukraine had used all of theirs up earlier in the war, but once in a while they kind of pop out, and it appears that they are keeping a few back for big hits. And this is one of them. So improved Tochka U, NATO reporting them as a Scarab B. So it's been around since the 80s, mid to late 80s. And yeah, has a range of 120 kilometers, which is 75 miles. Big old missiles. Anyway, what's it done? So it's hit this building, and that's been geolocated. So the building is one of the Azon plants, being geolocated there, North Bakhmut. As we know, the Azon plants are. There's also footage of, you can see here, footage of a bridge being hit as well, I believe. So not sure whether that is Tochka U as well, but that's a significant explosion. And I don't know whether the Russians were hiding vehicles under that bridge. We have seen them do that in Donetsk and other places. There is quite a lot of explosion there. I don't know if that's just from the missile or whether it's from secondary explosion from things that were underneath the bridge. Anyway, that bridge has been geolocated just nearby. So you've got the Azon plant there and a bridge there just over the railway line in Bakhmut. That's what was taken out. And of course, that's going to really hurt transportation around the northern area here for the Russians. So Trentelenko says the weapon cloud of the Ukrainian Tochka U strike is consistent with the thermobaric warhead. It was a thermobaric warhead. Every Wagner PMC, if it was a thermobaric warhead, every Wagner PMC contractor in the Azon plant was just killed. Now, that plant, I would imagine, they would have thought that was pretty safe, and I can imagine there would be quite a troop accumulation in there due to it being such a large building. The fact that Telenko continues, the fact Ukraine developed a thermobaric warhead for its Tochka U was announced by the Ukrainian General Staff in 2016. It looks like AFU was saving one of these last few remaining weapons for just the right target. My gut feeling was that Ukraine just assassinated several Wagner or Russian army VIPs. This is going to be really interesting to see whether they did have intel on who was there. We know that Prigozhin often visits the Wagner really close to the front line in Bakhmut. So there could be a chance. I'm sure we'd know about that by now, probably if that happened or not. But either way, you would assume that they're going to hit that building with this big missile when it takes maximum damage, gives out maximum pain to the Russians there. So we all know this we will know this went down if there is a Russian cruise missile volley into Ukrainian civilian areas in the next couple of days. And actually, there is news that a load of missile carriers are out in the Black Sea at the moment. We'll come to that later. It is what Putin automatically does when Ukraine publicly defeats Russia in any manner. This is a big thing. That those missile hits are pretty significant, and I think we're going to see a bunch more about that. Okay, continuing on hits. Rostov on the Don. So Rostov is just over the border into Russia. To the east, the southeast, in Russia has been one of my look-for targets for improved Ukrainian drone strike capability due to the railway marshalling yard and associated warehouses there. Watch a geographic location for further Ukrainian visits. So these are explosions being heard in Rostov. Let's see if we can hear those. So they don't have that bassy explosion sound that you expect on larger missiles. That sounds more like your drone type munition. Okay, according to Ivan Fedorov, explosions are reported from Russian-occupied Melatopo. Russian sources claim that HIMARS from the region of Orikhiv were responsible. Could be the video I posted a little earlier. The railway depot was hit. He posted a video of in the Orikhiv area pointing towards Melitopol a HIMARS volley being sent up. Melatopo is in the Zaporizhia area down there. HIMARS being sent from there, and that was quite widely reported as well. I think it's a railway depot that was hit in Melitopol, which, if we go to, I think Rostov on Don is around here, by the way, so that's where the missiles hit there, or the drones hit there. Melitopol is here, as you can see. Important railway passes through that on the way to Crimea or from Crimea, and being hit with Melitopol looks to have been targeted quite consistently over the last few weeks, and the people are theorizing that is just getting ready for a counteroffensive that is looming. Now, this is one of the biggest Russia on fires I've seen. This is Bryants, just over the border to the north of Ukraine. A locksmith died in this blaze at a chicken farm. He tried to put out the fire himself, and while the other employees escaped, they forgot about him. Owners of the farm said trade continues. They just lost one building, but I don't know whether that is like a load of flammable chicken shit, but excuse my French, but yeah, that is a considerable burnage. Now, whether that's just complete accident or something connected to the war, I don't know, but there are a lot of those fires taking place. Right, using ballistic missiles, Russia has launched another missile strike against civilian objects of Druzhkivka and Avdiivka in the Donetsk region. So Avdiivka, we know, is a place that's under a lot of pressure. That has been shelled and hit by missiles overnight. And then Druzhkivka is just south of Kramatorsk to the west of Bakhmut, that has been targeted. But we've also seen Konstantinivka targeted with a lot of shelling and possibly missiles as well. More destruction is evident in Avdiivka. The president's office published photos of the town's administration building that was hit. With everyone in shelters, there were no casualties. By the way, I've been told some families will return to Avdiivka after evacuation. I mean, people hang on tenuously to their lives, don't they? Now, I'm going to talk to you briefly. I had an argument with a pro-Russian voice on my threads yesterday because, that's how I roll. But this is important to talk about because I've heard this a few times, and you might think there's some kind of logic to that. So the argument is this. Most troops die from artillery wounds or as a result of artillery, right? That has been the case over the war. This is uncontroversial. Both sides, most troops die from artillery. Russians are using way more artillery than the Ukrainians. So it doesn't make sense to say that the Russians are dying at a rate that's higher than the Ukrainians. So the pro-Russian voices are saying, yeah, we all agree on the first two points. So how is it that the Russians are dying at a higher rate than the Ukrainians? So I just want to clear this one up for the time being. There are a whole bunch of reasons. I'm just going to go into a couple of them, right? So one is the Ukrainians use far more precision rounds than the Russians. So the Russians have Krasnopol, but they don't seem to have too many of them. The Ukrainians have Excalibur and are getting given them consistently. They're still being given them in subsequent military aid rounds, whereas the Russians are struggling to build stuff like that and make things like the Krasnopol. So we see single hit videos, lots of videos of single hits that do a lot of damage to Russian soldiers. Here's an example from yesterday. So this is a building in, I believe, the Bakhmut area, where we have a lot of Russian troops going into this building, over and over, and more troops coming around and going into the building. This is sped up, bish bash bosh, and then lo and behold, it's hit with precision artillery. Now, whether that single one there killed X amount of troops, I don't know. But the idea is that it's being spotted well by a lot of drones. Now, you could say the Russians have drones as well and can spot their artillery. But the artillery usage for the Russians is far more indiscriminate. They have, so if we look at just what they did last night, so at least 3 people died, 6 were injured during shelling of Konstantinivka. The head of Donetsk Regional Military Administration has said. Now, that could be missiles. They use shelling in interesting ways, but what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of shelling that takes place on civilian targets. So you're not taking out a large amount of troops, you're just indiscriminately hitting areas. Russian defense minister says, I will come to that in a second actually, but if we go down and look at this, so we've got Constantia being hit, we've got Nikopol, Minets. This is just shelling from being reported from Flash News over the last few days. Shelling of private houses, um, Russian shelling, Minets again, Nikopol. Shelling here in Zaporizhia region, Orikhiv, so on and so forth. Shelling here of Sloviansk, um, uh, Kharkiv, so on and so forth. So they are using a huge amount of ammunition rounds, and I showed you the pockmarked fields as well. So not only are they shelling civilian areas with a huge amount of rounds, and you're wondering how many soldiers they're actually taking out, but when you look at how many rounds they're using in fields, then you're thinking, wow. Now, Ukraine have been on the defensive now for since Kherson withdrawal. So the Russians have been on the offensive. So they will be using troops and getting those troops out in the wide open and attacking. Ukrainians will be defending either in trenches or in dugouts or in buildings. So in Bakhmut, there will be snipers in certain buildings. There won't be huge troop accumulations. They'll have an optimal troop accumulation, and the Russians don't seem to be using precision shelling of those places certainly as much as the Ukrainians. And meanwhile, the Russians are charging those buildings. They do have to come out of their buildings at some point to do the offensive. So they are going to lose more troops to shelling, for example, than the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians don't have as much ammunition, but they have to use it wisely. They're using a lot of spotting. They're using it very efficiently, just because they necessarily have to, and they're using precision ammunition, and they are on the defensive. Etc. etc. Now I could talk to you. There are other things to call into play here, but the idea is that for each shell that the Ukrainians are using, they are taking out more Russians on average than for each shell the Russians are using. So the Russians are using more shells. Artillery is the main source of casualties for both sides, but the Russians have been on the attack. The Ukrainians have been defending, and this has meant that the numbers of Russian deaths are higher than the number of Ukrainian deaths. There is, as I say, more to say on that, but that's a basic appraisal, and there is, I think, good evidence to suggest that, good video evidence to back that up. Now, the Russian defense minister says measures are being taken to increase ammunition stocks, so they are low on stocks. Shoigu, the defense minister, said that necessary measures are being taken to increase the Russian army's ammunition stocks for its war against Ukraine. This is obviously an acceptance that they are struggling for ammunition. Right, let's go to odds and sods. I talked to you yesterday about the UK Defence Intelligence trolling the Russians. They're doing that again today in what they've said. So while Russia has suffered up to 200,000 casualties since its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, a significant minority of these have been due to the non-combat causes. Trentelenko talks about this a lot. On the 27th of March, a Russian Telegram channel news channel reported that there have been extremely high numbers of incidents, crimes, and deaths linked to alcohol consumption amongst the deployed Russian forces. So this is coming from a Russian news source. Other leading causes of non-combat casualties likely include poor weapon handling drills, road traffic accidents, and climatic injuries such as hypothermia. Russian commanders likely identify prevalent alcohol abuse as particularly detrimental to combat effectiveness. And this is where they go. And so let's now go into full troll mode. However, with heavy drinking pervasive across much of Russian society, it has long been seen as a tacitly accepted part of military life, even on combat operations. I mean, this is true, but it's interesting that this is like their conclusion to their intelligence update, which is, yeah, Russians are all drunks type thing. You know, you can see where that's going. Right. ISW, Russian winter offensive has failed to achieve the Kremlin's goal of seizing the Donetsk and Luhansk regions' administrative borders by March the 31st. So this is his understanding that Putin has asked for the Donbass to be taken by the end of March. They haven't even taken Bakhmut yet. It's pathetic. Russian mill bloggers have threatened that Russian forces must finish their offensive operations in Bakhmut and Avdiivka to prepare for the Ukrainian counteroffensive they expect between April the 16th and May the 9th. Mill bloggers highlighted their disappointment that there have not been any decisive battles throughout the winter and observed that Russia will not be capable of continuing a large-scale offensive operation if it is unable to secure Bakhmut and Avdiivka in the coming weeks. Wow. So there is quite a lot of criticism within Russian ranks here. Kenneth Gregg, who's a Swedish fighter in Ukraine, helping out behind the lines at the moment, just has a few things that are worth mentioning here. So he's been in the Kremna-Sloviansk area to deliver tactical military equipment. At the same time, he said we're about 2 hours from the front line and had no incoming projectiles during the whole time. So this is like quite unusual, is the implication here, and it just reflects again. The reason I'm telling you this is because it also reflects that things are calm on the front line. Troop losses are down. Weather is difficult. Looks like the Russians have culminated. Kenneth Gregg here saying there's no incoming artillery or rocket fire in an area where you would definitely expect that normally. He goes on to say, we saw lots of troop accumulation and equipment in the forest, so they are preparing for our offensive. Interesting. The villages and Liman itself are almost completely destroyed. So, and then he goes on to talk about other areas and not much movement. So that is up in this area. So saying that there appears to be a troop accumulation around these sort of Izium, Liman, Kremna area here, or equipment accumulation. Don't know how much you can trust that. But yes. Moving on, we have Evilgherkin. This is an AI translation of what he's said. So basically, he says, unfortunately, the situation on the front, which the media has been so vocal about, is having a very negative effect on the whole country, on the entire state. We're heading for a military defeat because we're in a long, protracted war, and our economy, army, political system, most of the people in the country were not ready for. We haven't been able to push the enemy back even 10 kilometers from Donetsk, and we've left Kherson. He says, moved away from the. Sorry, it front loads all these subtitles at the beginning of the video. And we've left Kherson, moved away from the Kharkiv region, and moved away from Kyiv. Our army, political system, most of the government officials and executives were not ready for this kind of war. And that's actually the end of the subtitles. It just front loads them. Really staggering criticism from Evilgherkin, from Igor Strelkov here, who is as a ultra nationalist military blogger. He is also critical of how Russia have been executing this war, and he's now being openly critical of Putin. So he will fall out a window soon. I'm fairly sure. But yeah, that's just another reason to think that Russia have culminated. They have not succeeded in their objectives, and now they're going to be on the defensive for a Ukrainian counteroffensive. Right, General Staff says the Russians are illegally cutting down a forest in the Melatopo, Zaporizhia region, and taking it to go to the south. So there's real scorched earth. You know, hey, we come to liberate. We are liberating your area, and meanwhile, we're going to dig trenches everywhere. We're gonna take down all your trees. We're gonna do this. We're gonna do that, and it's like, is this really liberation? Because it looks like occupation, and it looks like you're destroying everything about our entire region here. It's just terrible. Just go away. Also, the occupiers continue forced certification of the population in the temporarily occupied territory of Kherson. Another thing to move to, Ukrainian intelligence is reporting that the number of Russian missile carriers in the Black Sea has increased from 3 to 12 in the last 24 hours, with 3 submarines also on active deployment. The launch of Caliber missiles towards Ukraine is possible, and that could be a reply to that big old Tochka U missile, or just they're ready for another one. A mobilized soldier from Samara has taken around 10 hostages in Bryants. This is just to the north of Ukraine in Russia. Independent media Buzzer reports that 35-year-old man later surrendered and released the other soldiers after negotiations. He was angry to learn his nephews were killed in Ukraine for Putin's war. You are going to see more and more of this kind of discontent amongst the Russian population as more and more people die. Body bags come back and they won't be happy. Right, military aid, not a lot to report at all today. European powerhouse, this is Oryx talking about the Polish military aid, and that's been updated with 100 KTO Rosamax IFVs, infantry fighting vehicles. I've not seen these before, purchased by Ukraine with EU and US funding. So 100 of these, brilliant. I don't know how soon they can get to the front line, or whether they've already been delivered. I don't know. I don't know whether that's a pledge rather than a delivered list, but they're going to need stuff like this if they are going to do these big counteroffensives. They just need so much equipment, much more than they've got. And at times I think, oh, they've got loads of equipment. It's going to be really good. It's going to be really effective. And then at other times I think they don't have nearly enough. So when there's suddenly 100 IFVs added to the list, that's really important. It's all about timing, though. And then the only other thing, I mean, it's not military, it's humanitarian aid. 140 bikes have been collected by Belgian volunteers. So up the Belgians here. I know they get a bit of a hard time for their lack of help that they've given in terms of military aid. They just don't have enough in their own army, even though they do have some significant military manufacturers there. So anyway, Belgian volunteers of Ghent for the Ukrainians, and they've arrived in Kiev and will be handed over to Ukrainian families. So that's really nice to see. Okay, let's go on to our final bit, geopolitics. So let's start with during a recent Moldovan football match. So Moldova is that nation just to the southwest of Ukraine, and there's been a lot of fomenting of anti-EU and anti-Moldovan government sentiment by the Russians, by people that have been shipped in by the Russians or by Russian sympathizers whipped up by the Kremlin. So at a football match, Moldovan football match between FC Zimbru and FC Sheriff, fans from FC Zimbru showed a banner speaking out against Russia. Quote, Russia brings tears, blood and horror for those who are blind, referring to what Russia has done to Moldova, Georgia, and is now doing to Ukraine. Why I think this is important is these are real people, I would say, doing real. These aren't like all the same flags being carried around by pro-Russians. Like, oh, it looks like those flags have just been bought and shipped in. This is organic, or it appears so anyway. Organic protest against the Russia that seems genuine. And if real people are doing this in a football match, then this I think is much more representative. But who knows? It's a bit of a boiling pot at the moment, melting pot at the moment of different sentiments. Moldova, Russia has murdered 262 athletes from Ukraine, says Tim White, and destroyed 363 sports facilities in the country. Tim White also is a sports commentator, by the way. This is something else he does on the side. So he gets, rightfully annoyed about issues to do with sports. That was a message given to the president of the International Gymnastics Federation, Morinari Watanabe, who's visiting Kyiv. Now, this will play into the potential banning of Russia and Belarus from certain sporting events, and that then has a knock-on effect with sowing discontent amongst the Russian public, which is very useful. Now, Armenia. Now, this is if you want an exhibition of double standards, this is about as good as it gets. Armenia has no intention to arrest Putin after the ratification of the Rome Statute, said Deputy Speaker of the Parliament Hakop Ashakyan in a comment to Armen Press. Now, the Rome Statute is what the International Criminal Court is kind of based on. So you sign up to the Rome Statute, you are then beholden to the International Criminal Court, and if, for example, Putin comes to your country, you're kind of obliged to arrest him, as you've signed up to that. But the question is, will countries actually do that? Now, Armenia joined the Rome Statute in response to Azerbaijan's aggression against the sovereign territories of Armenia, not to arrest Putin, he added. I mean, this makes me super, super angry, right? Because this is obvious double standards. It's like, hey, we didn't sign this kind of universal declaration of like intent to try and solve war crimes and hold people to account. We didn't sign up to this global agreement to arrest someone over there doing it. We've signed up to this for our benefit with those Azerbaijanis attacking us. I don't care if someone else attacks another country and causes war crimes over there, but if someone attacks our country and causes war crimes, I want the world to stand up and take notice and arrest the people responsible for that. If it happens in Armenia, couldn't give a toss if it happens over there. So this, like, as you can see, I'm going into rant mode. This really annoys me. Like, it's like that statement is so obviously hypocritical, so obviously double standards. It's like, how dare you set up a burglar alarm in your house? It's already noisy. Meanwhile, my burglar alarm's going off because, oh, those burglars, I don't want them coming into my house, but they go to yours. I really don't care. And your burglar alarm can shut up. It's like, what? Do you not see? I'm all right, Jack. Yeah, if you guys get screwed over, don't give a toss. But if it happens here, I'm angry. Yeah, anyway, it annoys me. And another thing that annoys me, and I keep having to go at Elon Musk, but for good reason, in terms of what's going on with Twitter, and misinformation. So this is super important. So recently, about 6 days ago, a load of Twitter code was leaked to the internet, and this caused Elon Musk to go pretty mental about this. He wants them held to account. Anyway, in the code are some really interesting things. For example, we found out that his own tweets are amplified. Because that's fair, isn't it? That's free speech is more free for some people than it is for others. So if you really believe in free speech, you shouldn't be either. If he's saying we shouldn't constrain free speech, constraining other people's free speech is functionally the same as amplifying your own, or amplifying a voice and dampening another voice. Those two things have the same effects, right? So don't say you're a free speech absolutist and then amplify your own voice above everyone else's. But this is the one that should worry you more, which is they've got misinformation algorithms. So this suppresses information that is misinformation. And you think actually that's a good use of dampening down free speech, because I believe open misinformation is dangerous, especially if it's gets its desired objective of creating sympathy and empathy for Russia and support for Russia, and then global support and then political support, so then they can perpetuate the war, killing innocent people, right? Okay, let's put a lid on that kind of disinformation. But within the disinformation algorithm, the misinformation algorithm is Ukraine news. So actually, it appears that Elon Musk has got Twitter to hide Ukraine news. So firstly, someone proved Elon Musk decided to hide news of Ukraine on Twitter. And now why would he do that? Now Ukraine news is as dangerous as disinformation and needs silencing. The only action we can take is to retweet and repeat as much as possible this bit of news. And this comes from Akash Gupta, who's done a really good analysis of the leaked code. And he says misinformation is highly downranked. Anything that is categorized as misinformation gets the rug pulled from under it, so you don't get to read about it. Surprisingly, so are posts about Ukraine. Really interesting and really insidious, and I don't like that at all. Especially when I use. Luckily, I've curated my own kind of sources. I don't like look. I don't have time to look too much in the open area about general Ukraine stuff. But if I was, it would be more difficult. There have been lots of complaints about stuff going on with regard to Twitter recently. The blue check marks is one thing that's an absolute nightmare, where you're having to pay for verification. But of course, it means that people are just paying to pretend to be other people, and it's just absolute nightmare. Anyway, whatever. Highlights of the night as well. So the last bit is that Finland has frozen the assets of the Russian Scientific and Cultural Centre. So not only are Finland looking like they're joining NATO, but they are also going about their business of freezing Russian assets, which is all good news there. Anyway, that's the end of the news for today. I'm just out in a bit, so I don't know when I'll be able to get my frontline update, but I pre-recorded today's extra video, so the extra video will come out next, and then my frontline update will probably be the last video today. Anyway, just to let you know, thank you so much for all your support. An amazing bunch of people you are. Thanks for your support on Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal. Really appreciate that. Thanks so much to Vicky Stewart yesterday or the last few days, and other people who have been so wonderful. Egon as well on Buy Me a Coffee. Thanks to all the members of the channel. You are all legends. Really appreciate it. Anyway, toodle pips.